Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be talking to you today about reality therapy and choice theory. And I say I'm very excited because this is a model that I myself use. I learned about in graduate school and then had a chance to practice during my internship. And I was very fortunate to have supervision from an expert in this model, a woman named Dr. Patricia Roby out at Governor State University, who is very well known in the field for her use of reality therapy. She has several articles published and also has done several videos with this model. I think when you're first getting into and being introduced to these different kind of counseling theories and different helping models, it can be a bit overwhelming. And I think for me, it almost felt like shopping in a grocery store and you're looking at this whole wall of cookies, but you're just not sure which one is right for you. And it's almost like you're just kind of trying to pick one that sounds good. But as you're learning about the different models, they all sound good. So the chocolate chip cookies sound really good, and so do the oatmeal raisin cookies, and so do the peanut butter cookies. And what I think you have to do is you do have to try them a little bit, but you have to look for one that really speaks to you and helps you understand your own behavior and applies to yourself first before you can just start trying to implement a theory and working with other people. And for me, I think I found reality therapy and the model that underlies it really, which is choice theory, just really spoke to me. It made sense as far as explaining behavior, makes sense as far as how you could implement it in working with somebody. And I think it has a lot of really practical and useful benefits. So, like I said, I'm looking forward to talking to you about this and giving you a little bit of an overview and some insight into how this model and approach work. So right off the bat, we need to talk about behavior. This is probably the most important term in the entire model. So in looking at behavior and what behavior means and the implications it has. So first of all we can do is behave. Now these theories and concepts come to us from Dr. William Glasser, who's the one who developed this model, but it has been refined a little bit over the years and is now practiced in some very new and exciting ways. But this is a core concept that everything we do is considered part of our behavior. Another important piece is that our behavior is purposeful. So it's driven in order to try to meet our needs. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go. And finally, our behavior consists of 4 different elements, and each of these is important, and we'll look at how each one is influenced by different decisions we make. But our behavior consists of our actions, our thoughts, our emotions, as well as our physiology. So a lot of times we think of behavior just as the actions that we do, the physical actions we take on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis. And that's a really big, important part of this model. But sometimes we overlook our thoughts. And so this is a kind of cognitive behavioral approach in that it's incorporating both behavior as well as thinking. And it's also paying attention to our emotions and even our physiological state. So not just how we're feeling emotionally, but how we're feeling physically. And our physiology can be a really big cue for us as far as what's going on. So I said we were going to talk about how our behavior is purposeful, and the purpose is really to meet our 5 basic needs. So this is another core critical concept that we all have 5 basic needs. And Glasser says these are genetically encoded. We all have these same needs as human beings, and we all try to meet them through our behaviors. So let's take a look first at freedom. So freedom being that first of the 5 basic needs. So we all have a need and a desire to be independent, make our own choices, feel like we have a sense of control over what we're doing. The next basic need is fun. So we also have a need to enjoy ourselves, to do things that are pleasurable, to do things that are exciting and interesting to us. Next up, we have power. So power can be several different things. I often think of it like achievement or accomplishment. It can involve a level of control as well. Sometimes it can have a negative connotation when you talk about power and control. So really it's about being successful, achieving things, reaching your goals, accomplishing things that you want to, and again, having a kind of sense of control over those decisions and the accomplishments that we have. The next one is a very important one. It's called love and belonging. So that need to connect with other people, to have relationships in our life and also with ourselves, but really being able to connect, feel like you're a part of something. It's family, it's friends, it's intimate relationships with other people are really a core piece here. And then the fifth and final need that we all have is the need for survival. And that includes our safety, shelter, food, and water, the foundational things that we need in order to stay alive and function. Now, what's interesting about the basic needs is that we all have them to varying degrees, but we each have them, and our behavior is all aimed at meeting those basic needs. The picture you're looking at right now is a way that a lot of times people in the counseling field talk about reality therapy. They use this metaphor or analogy of an automobile. And so with this automobile, again, this is another way of understanding our behavior and how we're trying to get our needs met. The first thing to note is that you are the one at the steering wheel. You're the driver. You're the one in control. So choice theory was originally called control theory by Glasser. And basically what he's talking about is making choices that are effective to take effective control of your life. So he later named it choice theory because there was some negative connotation with control. But when you understand that it's taking effective control of your life, it's making decisions that are meaningful to you, that's where that name comes from. So you're the driver, you're the one in control here. At the front of the car, if you think of this as like a front wheel drive car, at the front of the car where the power is and where you really have the most control, that's really pushing everything forward, is number one with your actions and number two with your thoughts. So that's what's at the front of the car, your thoughts and your actions. And those are the things we have most easy access to. So controlling our behavior and controlling our thoughts, that's what we, for the most part, have direct control over and the easiest time being able to change. Now at the back of the car, which kind of gets pulled along with those thoughts and actions, are emotions and our physiology. So in this model, it might seem like, well, those are at the back, emotions and physiology, are we saying those aren't as important? And that's really not the message at all. Those are actually really critical. And in the theory, they give us a great indication of what's going on with us. So we need to be in touch with our emotions as well as with our physical self to have a sense of where we're at, a sense of whether our choices are effective and they're working for us or whether they're ineffective and we need to take a look at those. So those tend to be, at least in the picture here, at the back, and they're kind of getting pulled along or influenced by the thoughts or actions, but they're not less important. The last piece is that you have these wants, and think of the wants as kind of like the actual steering wheel that's kind of driving the whole car. Even though you're in control, it's the wants that are pushing you to make certain actions or have certain thoughts. So what is it that we want? And each of us has different things that we desire, different things we want. That's really what's going to control what we do, what we say, what we think, and then ultimately how we feel and respond to those things. A really key question in all of this, and this is something we can ask ourselves, it might be a question we would even ask our clients, is are your behaviors working? And you see the sign there. Every direction that you go, it says it's the right way. And that's because the model doesn't judge for you what's the right thing to do. It's not telling you a certain choice to make or what you should be choosing or doing. It allows you to evaluate for yourself whether it's effective or not, whether it's working, whether what you think the right path for yourself is. So thinking for a minute in terms of our choices. So if you follow the path there, your choices can be either helpful or harmful. So reality therapy doesn't really look at behavior as good or bad in a moral sense. It looks at it more in terms of whether it's working or not, if it's helpful or if it's harmful. remembering that all behavior is at the time the best the person can do to meet their needs and get their wants fulfilled. So we're really not judging people for the choices they make. We're trying to understand that each person is doing the best that he or she can given the circumstances. But at the same time, we're trying to evaluate those choices and see if we can make better ones in the future. When we do make helpful choices, we tend to have healthy outcomes, physically, emotionally. Again, going back to the car, the emotions and physiology. When we're making good choices up front, then we're healthy, we feel good, we tend to have good, healthy relationships, we tend to be physically healthy. On the other side, when we're making choices that are harmful, we tend to have unhealthy outcomes. We're doing things that are bad for our health, physically, mentally, emotionally. They end up being more stressful, and they end up leading either to illness or damaged relationships and things like that. So one of the things Glasser talks about, and sometimes people have a difficult time with, is he doesn't look at mental illness as something that happens to us. So a lot of times we might say something like, I feel depressed. And Glasser would try to turn that around for somebody and say, really what you're doing is depressing. And he phrases it that way so that the person experiencing that thinks of it more as an active state that's based on something they're doing, almost a choice they're making. We have to be very careful that we're not judging somebody or putting some kind of blame on them if they are feeling depressed. But what Glasser wanted to do was make it a more active state, so it's something that you can control and something you can do something about, very importantly. So whether you're looking at your own behavior or working with somebody else, there's always something you can do about the current situation. So instead of depressing, which Glasser would look at as a choice somebody's making to meet their needs, he wouldn't blame them for that choice. He would help them see that it's maybe helping meet their need for freedom to some extent, or maybe even power in a certain way. So he would say there's a reason you're depressing and there's a reason you're choosing that, but ultimately that choice is harmful and unhealthy for you. So let's look at choices that you can make that would still meet those other needs, but wouldn't lead to an unhealthy outcome. Another thing a lot of us do to try to meet our needs, but that ends up being very unhealthy for us, are addictive behaviors. So addictive behaviors can meet many needs. It could be for power and control. It could be for fun, for freedom, for belonging, if you're using with others or engaging in those addictive behaviors with others. But again, ultimately over time, those end up being very harmful and unhealthy behaviors for us. And for Glasser, again, with this model, it's all about identifying those and then trying to find new, healthier behaviors to replace those. One of his kind of interesting contributions to this field is a book called Positive Addiction. And some people have bought into this idea that the way to deal with an addictive behavior is to replace it with another kind of like healthier or more acceptable addictive behavior. So for example, somebody who used to drink every day maybe turns that into going to meetings every day, self-help meetings, or people start running, and running becomes almost like this positive addiction, something that they crave and they want to keep doing over and over, but it ultimately is a healthy decision as opposed to an unhealthy one. Really important concept in the model is that meaningful relationships are at the core of our existence. What really makes life matter is that we have meaningful connections with other people and healthy relationships with other people. Glasser felt that when we have meaningful relationships, we almost don't need any kind of counseling because those healthy relationships really keep us on the right track. But when we have broken relationships, damaged relationships, or a lack of any kind of meaningful connection in our lives, that's when we really struggle. That's when we turn to things like addictive behaviors, to depression, to isolation, and really need to change those unhealthy relationships and find meaningful connections in order to change and be back on the healthy path. Let's first take a look at those unhealthy kinds of habits that we tend to engage engage in, the things that Glasser calls the 7 deadly habits. So first we have nagging, and I think we all have a sense of what that is when we're just kind of constantly hounding somebody, whether we want them to do something or we want them to change some kind of behavior. That kind of nagging tends to not be very helpful. Then we have blaming, where we kind of point the finger at the other person no matter what happens. If anything goes wrong, we put the blame on them. Being critical, criticizing the person all the time. Complaining about what the person does or says, which again doesn't end up being helpful. So when you think about these in the context of what actually is useful or helpful in terms of making the relationship stronger or getting a desired outcome, these things, although they may feel good for us in the moment, they end up just deteriorating the relationship. Next, we have threatening, where somebody would be giving ultimatums or saying, if you don't change or if you don't do what I want, there's going to be some kind of consequence. And then actually carrying out some consequence, punishing the other person. And then finally, we have bribing the other person. And what you'll notice about all of these different habits is that they're ways that we try to get somebody else to change their behavior to meet our needs. And you can see why that's completely ineffective. It's not helpful. What the model here is saying is that we can only control our own behavior. And so we're really talking about how do we take effective control of our own behavior. So in a relationship, we can't change somebody else's behavior, but there are habits that we can engage in that are going to be much more healthy. And that's what we'll talk about next. On the flip side of those deadly habits, we also have 7 caring habits. And the 7 caring habits are ways that we nurture and make our relationships more positive and healthy. So these habits include things like listening to the other person, accepting the other person, being encouraging of someone else. If you think about, if you're familiar with Adlerian therapy, Alfred Adler's model, this is a really big concept for him. He looks at society and really the world around us as often being this really discouraging place that can really bring down our hopes and dreams and kind of makes us think smaller than we really are. And the opposite of that would be this caring, nurturing approach where we actually encourage somebody, we support somebody in their goals, in their dreams, and in their ambitions. Caring habits also include trusting the other person, as well as being supportive, like we just talked about, respecting the other person, and finally, negotiating our differences. So when we do have conflict, there's ways to compromise and there's ways to work that out. Another key concept is that of the quality world. And this is an idea that I think gets a little confusing. I've even tried to share it with clients sometimes, and I found that some of the terminology maybe gets a little confusing. Even calling it a quality world, I think people don't really have a good concept of what that is, but it is an important term in the model. And essentially what it means is, what's your ideal picture of how things would look? So if you could have everything that you wanted in your universe, in your world, what would that look like? What would that include? And there is a pretty simple activity that I'll show you that I do with clients that helps them kind of grasp this idea and get a sense of where they're at versus their kind of dream picture of where they'd want things to be. And so simply what I would have somebody do, either I'd have this already on a piece of paper or just have them take a piece of paper and draw 2 different circles. So one circle on that side of the piece of paper, a second circle on the other side of the paper, and then label each one. Label the first one current world. So this is kind of like how things are right now. And then label the other side ideal world. So technically that's your quality world, but sometimes I just get that word out of there altogether. So let's talk about what your ideal world would look like. So in the circle for current world, you would list all the things kind of as they are now in your life. What's your job, your relationship situation, what kind of car are you driving, where are you living? So all the things that are sort of influencing you right now. What's your general emotional state right now, your general physical state right now. And you kind of list all that under the left-hand side bubble. After you do that for a few minutes, then you can go to the right-hand side and you start talking about if you could imagine things being exactly the way you want, almost kind of like no limitations, what would your ideal world look like? So does it mean a different job? Does it mean living in a different place? Does it mean being in a different relationship? And so what this does is it draws some contrast between where things are now and where you might like things to be. It also can give you some really good talking points for things to discuss with a person, as well as start to develop a treatment plan around this. So if you start noticing some discrepancies, maybe in relationship or living situation, or somebody says, I really wish I had my college degree, that would be my ideal world, but now, I'm 10 credits short and it's like impossible for me to find time to go back. That would be something to start addressing on a treatment plan if it's a goal that they would like to turn into some kind of action plan, and figure out how you can get to some of the things on the ideal world side. Now let's take a look at what goes into the treatment process if you are working with a client in a clinical setting. And there's 4 pieces I want to stand out and have you remember. So the first part is connecting with the client. It's absolutely a foundational element in any kind of model that you build that rapport and establish a relationship with a client really before anything else can happen. So we start by connecting with the client and building that relationship and building trust. Next, we invite and encourage the client to commit to the process. So in order for any kind of change, any kind of treatment plan to go into place, the client needs to be willing to engage in the process and discuss what's important to them. Remember back to your stages of change process, and that if you don't have somebody who's at least into the contemplation or preparation stage, you're going to be nowhere near doing any kinds of actions. So you still have to meet the client where he or she is at and talk to them about what their goals are and what they're willing to work on at this point. Because without some kind of commitment and buy-in from the client, you're going to be the one doing all of the work. After that, while the treatment is happening, it's important that the client evaluates their behavior. So taking a look at whether things are working or not, making changes as needed, but the client has to decide if what they're doing is working for them or not, and then make adjustments with you as they go. And then finally, we support the client through this process. Clients are going to experience consequences as a result of their decisions, and that's perfectly fine. That's part of life. We don't punish the client for their choices. That's not our role as clinicians. Our role is to support them as they're making this transition, as they're going through these significant behavior changes. Okay, and this is now the last slide. And this is just a simple little device that is kind of a treatment tool. And there was a student of reality therapy named Robert Wubbelding who came along and really made a lot of contributions to reality therapy. And one of the things he added was this concept of WDEP. So the first part of that is want. So if you're working with a client, you first want to figure out what it is the client actually wants. So remember back to the car, picture the car we saw a few slides ago. What is it that the client wants? What is it that's driving this picture? And figuring that out is going to really be important. This is almost like an assessment tool. Before you can move forward and develop a treatment plan or talk about outcomes that you want to see, you have to figure out what it is the client wants. Then you ask, what is the client doing? What are you doing right now to try to reach that ideal world picture, to try to accomplish those goals? What are the behaviors and actions, if anything, you're doing right now? And then, are those behaviors effective? So is it working? So what you've been doing so far, has that worked for you? If not, have you ever done anything that's worked, or what might be effective? But we need to first evaluate what we're doing right now. And then finally, we make a plan. So if it's not currently working, so if I know I want to be in a healthy relationship, I want to be sober, I want to be in a stable living environment, what am I doing about those things? Is what I'm doing actually working? And then let's make a plan for what I can do going forward to start reaching those goals. So WDEP is a nice simple way of remembering that. And you can kind of keep bringing that model up, not only during the assessment, but as you continue working with a client, you continually evaluate, is this still what you want? What are you doing about it? Is that effective and is it working? And if not, then let's make a plan to try to change that. All right, so that concludes this presentation on reality therapy. Like I said, it's a model that I feel like speaks to me and a good understanding of my own behavior as well as people that I've worked with. I think it has a lot of practical uses, and hopefully you'll find that there's some terminology and maybe some techniques in here that also work for you.